Hey Scouts, here for another video. Today I want to talk about Scout rank requirement number 4A, which is show how to tie a square knot, 2 half hitches, and a taut line hitch, and then explain how each knot is used. So that's 3 knots, square knot, 2 half hitches, and a taut line hitch. So let's talk about each one of those, and we'll actually kind of demonstrate how each is tied, and then we'll talk through what they're used for. So to start out, we're going to take this piece of rope here and we're going to work on tying those knots. So let's start with a square knot. All right. And if you want to come in for a zoom shot here, I'm going to hold the rope so that both ends are here out, that I'm working with kind of both ends of the rope on this particular one. A lot of times I might work with actually 2 separate ropes, but this is just one length of rope. It'll work fine. So what I'm going to do, there's a little rhyme you can kind of, well, not really a rhyme, but kind of a saying that helps you tie a square knot. And so it's right over left and then left over right. And let me demonstrate what I mean by that. So although this may be reversed in the video as you're watching it, this is my right hand, this is my left hand. All right. And so I'm going to take the right rope and put it over, namely on top of the left rope, and then I'm just going to tie a plain old overhand knot with those, just like that. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take left over right, so just do that exact opposite of what I just did, put the left one on top and bring it through, and then I'm going to pull that together, and that is a square knot. You'll notice if you've done it right, you'll see a loop on either end with parallel ropes coming out of the loop. And if I've done it right, I can hold the ends out here and push together, and you'll see how it kind of slides like that. If I've done the square knot right, it'll do that. Okay? Now let me show you what happens if you forget to do the opposite on your second one. So let's start again. We'll do right over left. But now on this one, let me do right over left again and show you what happens there. I get a knot that's fairly close, but this one's actually called a granny knot. And you'll see the loop has kind of more of a mess coming out of it, okay? I don't have both ropes going out the same side of the loop. I actually have them coming out opposite sides of the loops on either end. And if I try to push it together, it's kind of a mess. It doesn't really do it. All right, so that's a granny knot. That's not what we want. So in this case, I want to put left over right instead of right over left. And now I'm back to a square knot. So there we go. That's a square knot. Now, a couple of things that square knots can be used for quickly. One is to join 2 pieces of rope together that are roughly of similar diameter, so similar size ropes. Okay, that's actually another name for the square knot, is a joining knot. Okay, and that's frankly why they make you do this so early in Scouts, is you've just joined Scouts, you're learning the joining knot. Kind of funny. So that's a big use for square knots, is putting together 2 ropes that are similar sized. We have another knot that you'll learn later for putting together ropes that are of different sizes. So we'll talk about that when we get there, but that's not today. Another use for square knots is, and people don't use it as much for this nowadays because they use tape as opposed to rope or string, but for people who used to use string to wrap up packages, and when they finished up, they would sort of finish up tying a square knot at the very end of everything to tie it all together. Okay, and maybe people might still do that with ribbons or things on packages, but for the most part, that's a more older use. But anyway, that's a couple uses of the square knot. All right, so that's the first knot we need to learn. Fairly simple, but go ahead and practice it. It'll take you a few times to get it, but that's a pretty simple knot to learn. All right. The next 2 that we're going to learn are both what are called hitches. All right, now I want to talk about that word for just a sec, hitch. Probably most of you have heard that word before, and but maybe not so much with respect to rope, but rather with respect to, say, a trailer, like a trailer hitch. Okay, and so But a trailer hitch, well, what does that do? It connects the trailer to a truck or a car or whatever's going to pull the trailer. It connects the two things together. Well, that's ultimately what these two knots are intended to do, is to connect one thing to a different thing. We're going to hitch something to a pole or to a hook or something like that. So let me now demonstrate the first of these. It's called 2 half hitches. That sounds like 2 separate things. It's really not. Well, it is and it isn't. What it is it's a knot that's actually composed of 2 of another knot. That's a little confusing. Let me show you though. Oh, and we have a guest here in our video. This is our little kitty Mochi. She's going to be probably assisting me on and off here as I demonstrate this knot. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead. This is the post that I'm going to use as the chair that I was sitting on, the chair leg. And I'm just going to take my rope and wrap it around the post here. Now I do want to talk about, it's a little bit helpful as I'm going through this to use some terminology. I'm going to have one part of the rope that it's really going to do nothing but sit there. It's going to stay stationary, and that's going to be called the standing end of the rope, because that's really all it's going to do is just stand, okay? The other end of the rope over here is going to be called the working end. And what you're going to see is all of the actual tying I'm going to do is going to happen here on the working end. So I'm going to take the working end and lay it over the top of the standing end. And I like to just put my thumb right there on top of where those 2 ropes join. But you can see the working end is on top. I just like to hold it there. That makes it a little easier for me to keep working. You'll also notice right here, I've created a hole, okay? What I do is to think, I'm going to take now that working end and bring it up through the hole from the bottom, okay? And believe it or not, that thing I just did is a half hitch. That's 1 half hitch, okay? And I could just go with that. It's not very strong though, and if I put too much tension on here, that knot will just sort of come undone. So that's a half hitch. Well, this knot that we're learning is 2 half hitches. So, well, why don't I just do the same thing again? Take my working end, put it over the top of the standing end. I'm going to hold my thumb there again. Bring the very end up here through the hole that I just made. I made a new hole. And then I'm going to tighten that down towards the other half hitch that I made. And guess what? There's 2 half hitches, okay? And I like to think of that as essentially, it looks a little bit like a couple of knuckles with a thumb sticking out. You might see that. There's the knuckles, there's the thumb sticking out, okay? That sort of helps me visualize what I want that knot to look like when I'm done. Now you'll notice this is a slip knot in the sense that I can slip it back and forth, all right? But if I had something out on this end of this rope, I've now tied it securely to this chair. Okay, so that's what a hitch does, is it really just sort of ties whatever's on the other end of this rope to this chair, okay? And so 2 half hitches, one thing that you'll notice about 2 half hitches though is, if I put this out again, if I pull on this thing hard enough, it'll slide just under tension, okay? And sometimes that's not such a big deal. Like if I want to tie a boat to a dock, this is a pretty good knot to use, because I really don't care if the rope gets a little longer or a little shorter. I just want to make sure the boat's not going to disappear. All right, I want to make sure that it's tied to the dock. Okay, so in that case, using 2 half hitches is probably not such a bad knot to use. Okay, if I wanted to tie my horse to a hitching post like in the Old West, that again might be another simple knot I might use in the reins, wrap them around the hitching post and tie 2 half hitches. That'll probably be plenty. All right, so there's a couple of uses for 2 half hitches. Okay, now let me untie that and talk about the third knot that we're going to learn, which is called a taut line hitch. And it's actually very similar to the one we just did, just with one little extra wrinkle added in. Okay, so I'm going to start out again. I've got my standing end here, just like I did before. I got my working end, okay? And I want to give myself enough rope that I actually have some to work with, okay? I'm going to start this knot exactly the same as I just did for half hitches. I'm going to make a half hitch, okay? There we go. There's 1 half hitch. But in this case, where before what I would do is to make another half hitch out here, I'm actually going to come back up through this same hole a second time. So you'll notice I actually have wrapped around the standing end twice here now on this back end. All right, now to finish this knot, now I'm going to make the additional half hitch out here on the other side. And I'm going to pull that tight. Taut, by the way, is another word that kind of means tight. I'm going to pull that knot nice and tight together, okay? And you'll notice that it also can slip, but the interesting thing about this one is if I've tied it correctly, I can really yank on that rope, but it's not going to slide like the two half hitches did. The reason for that is that one extra loop in there actually adds just enough friction that I can't really do that very well under tension and make that thing slide. Now I can, if I hold on to the knot, slide it that way, but just doing it under tension alone, if I've tied it correctly, won't do it. Okay, and in that case, you might notice I need to use 3 knuckles now on my thumb to show that one. Kind of the same idea. There's the 3 knuckles with the thumb sticking out. Okay, and there you go. That's a taut line hitch. Now, when would I use this one versus when I'd use 2 half hitches? So for a taut line hitch, what I would want you to use that one for is a situation where I don't want the length of this rope to change. I want to be able to set the length of it and know that it's going to stay that same length. Okay, in other words, if I want to tie something down and make it nice and tight, like say a rain fly on your tent or a dining fly over a picnic table that I'm anchoring to the ground, well, I don't want this rope to loosen up in those cases, because then that thing will flop down and maybe even fall apart. Okay, I want it to stay nice and tight. And see, now I've loosened this up by playing around with it enough that it's starting to slide. But at any rate, I want that thing to stay nice and tight, stay the same length once I've set it, so that it'll hold the tent or the dining fly secure. So that's a couple of uses for a taut line hitch. It's really useful. I use it all the time, actually, when I'm setting up my tents. I have one of these tied on either side on the rain fly so that I can pull it out away from the tent to keep it off of the tent itself so the water doesn't just seep in. The water will run down the side of the rain fly. So there you go. That's those 3 knots. They do take a little bit of practice. You're going to need to go find yourself some rope and practice them a few times. They're not necessarily the easiest things to do when you first start, but they're also fairly simple knots. A few times practicing them, you should be able to get them. All right, thanks so much, and we'll talk to you next time.